in the preamble of Idiocracy. You have these people that would not be able to fend for themselves, reproducing more than the people who are actually producing in society. And in addition to that, you have medical advancements that are furthering the possibility that they will reproduce and create offspring with similar mutations. And again, this is something that wasn't all that controversial in 2006. Sure, Mike Judge had to show the people who were the so-called mutants as these white hillbillies in order to describe this scenario. But again, this isn't something... I remember watching this in 2006 and I wasn't like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. It was just common sense. It was something that was just generally accepted. The only thing that was maybe groundbreaking was to really apply this on a large scale and say, hey, look, if this continues for any long period of time, we're going to have a dysgenic effect on society. And that's really what this movie's about. So anyway, back to the story. We're introduced to a completely average man, average 2006 man. In fact, he's been chosen for this new assignment for the military precisely because he is so average. The military is testing a human hibernation machine. The idea is that the military wants to be able to train super soldiers and then freeze them when they're at their physical and mental peak, so that if they ever need them, they can thaw them out and let them loose. This idea is kind of amusing because it's more realistic than really what you normally get in a movie like this about hibernation from Hollywood. Movies that like to promote military recruitment by pumping out films that focus on how honorable and sexy the military is. You'd expect a Hollywood film to say that, oh, the reason why we need this hibernation machine is for space travel or something, exciting and groundbreaking. But Mike Judge, as he often does, writes a more realistic scenario where the military just, as the rest of our government, treats people like resources instead of humans. Why not keep a freezer full of killing machines that you can just warm up in the microwave when you need them and then throw them away when you're done? It's the American way. The man in charge of this project begins to show the other military men at the meeting that Joe is completely average. There's even a chart with his IQ and the bell curve where Joe seems to score a perfect 100. He's average in every way. They have also found a female subject to participate in the experiment, but instead of an average Joe enlisted men, in 2006, it might be because it wasn't as common to have women in the military, but the project leader instead decides to choose a prostitute by the name of Rita in exchange for dropping some charges and making a deal with her pimp named Upgrade. The experiment is supposed to keep Joe and Rita frozen in a coffin-like pod for 1 year, after which they'll be thawed out, and if the experiment works, they're confident they can store humans indefinitely in this frozen state. But, of course, there wouldn't be a movie if that's all that happened. The officer in charge of the super-secret experiment is arrested on prostitution and human trafficking charges. Not too far from the truth, I would say. The base is closed and demolished to make room for a Fuddruckers, and the coffins holding the sleeping Rita and Joe are put in a dump where they're forgotten. Several years go by, and every year, Americans get stupider and stupider and stupider, until 500 years later, a massive trash avalanche uncovers the coffins and wakes up Joe and Rita from their slumber. Joe's coffin is propelled into a living pod of a man watching television. The show that he's watching is simply called Ow My Balls, and it's just shot after shot of a man injuring his balls. The man watching this show just kind of laughs stupidly while he stuffs food from a bucket into his face and sits on a recliner with a toilet built into it. He's so preoccupied by the low IQ humor on his television screen, he hasn't even bothered to turn around and look and see what all the noise was when the coffin came smashing through his wall. Joe gets out of the coffin and he's confused. He asks the man where he is, but the man reacts violently and throws him out of the window for interrupting his television show. Joe wanders the streets of this dystopian nightmare where the year is now 2505. Everyone is a moron. The world is covered in corporate logos. Signs of incompetence are everywhere. He goes to a hospital for help. The woman working at the hospital is just as stupid as everyone he's encountered on the street. In fact, she's so dumb, she doesn't seem to even possess the ability to talk. She just listens to him describe his problem. And in front of her, she's got a keyboard that's been designed kind of like a Fisher-Price toy, so that all she has to do is push a simple symbol on the keyboard that remotely aligns with what he says is wrong with him. And the AI takes care of the rest. Once again, I can tell you this is kind of reality. This is the direction the computers are going in. I remember when I was first using computers as a child, having to write code to get your computer to do anything. And not that I think that's an ideal, but that you had to have technical knowledge in order to get computers to act, to do anything. And to go from that already to touchscreens that literal chimpanzees can operate. Chimpanzees can operate Instagram, which really does kind of illustrate, even now, the public getting dumbed down and technology accommodating this loss of intelligence in the public. In this dystopian future, everything seems to be automated, run by some kind of AI, and corporate logos are everywhere. Capitalism has finally produced the multicultural pasture for the herds of mindless consumers that it always aspired to create. Consumers that are literally just barely smart enough to push the buttons, pull the levers, and buy the products to stay alive. Joe finally realizes that something's gone horribly wrong. He hasn't just been asleep for 1 year. He finally realizes it's been 500 years, and he's horrified by this dystopian future. Just as he realizes this, Joe's doctor discovers that Joe doesn't have the tattoo that apparently everyone is supposed to have, that the tattoo that brands them like cattle and also allows them to operate within this dystopia. Joe is arrested and forced to get a tattoo and become one of the cattle. After receiving his brand or his tattoo, they have him take an aptitude test before hauling him off to prison. Once Joe's in the prison, however, he realizes everyone's so stupid. The prison guards are so dumb, he can just talk his way out of prison and they let him go. And by the time the AI discovers that something's wrong, it's already too late and he's escaped. While on the run, Joe finds out that there's a time machine. So he goes and finds Rita, the other person that was frozen for 500 years, and he tells her what's happened, and they go to try to find the time machine. But before they can get to the time machine, Joe is arrested in Costco and taken into custody because, as it turns out, when he took the aptitude test, when they were bringing him into prison, he scored the highest IQ score that they had ever seen. He's technically the smartest person in the world now, and the president wants to see him. We now meet the president, and once again, obviously, demographics here are not an accident. The president decides to make Joe a member of his cabinet. He's going to be Secretary of Interior. So he takes him to the Capitol building that resembles a reality TV show set. So basically exactly the same as today, except for more strobe lights. And President Camacho tells the people that Joe, with his super high IQ, will fix all of the problems that they're having. There's a drought. The crops have been dying and they don't know why. And there's dust storms. And so now they've got this super genius. He's going to fix all of the problems. Joe, of course, doesn't know anything about farming. He's a little intimidated by having to solve all of the nation's problems, but he quickly discovers that the crops are dying because the largest corporation in this version of America, Brondo, an energy drink manufacturer, long ago decided that water was a threat to their profits. So they bought the FDA and the FCC, and they convinced people to replace water for their energy drink, Brondo, for everything, including watering crops. And the salts in the drink slowly built up in the soil, and it started killing off the crops. So the farmers are literally watering their crops with energy drink, and all they have to do, Joe decides, is switch back to water. So Joe gets them to start watering plants with water again. But now there's another problem. Think of all the corporate monopolies we have right now that just go unchecked, that don't get broken up like AT&T did. Companies like Google, for example, but there are several companies that have just become these mega corporations. Companies like Apple. This too big to fail style of capitalism that's been going on in our country for decades. Imagine that keeps going for 500 years, which is what's happened in this dystopian future. So in this dystopian future, Brondo is the company that has essentially devoured all of the smaller companies, and now half the country works for Brondo. And when the stock price begins to plummet because Brondo is now in competition with water again, unemployment skyrockets because Brondo is run by an AI. And the AI sees that the stock price is going down, so it just automatically lays off half of their workforce. So now essentially a quarter of the country is unemployed overnight. And when the stupid people put together that what caused this, what triggered this layoff, was Joe telling them to use water on plants instead of Brondo, they sentence him to a gladiator-like public execution in a giant arena with monster trucks. Now, this is something I think a lot of us can relate to. Obviously not the giant arena and monster trucks, but history is full of examples where societies persecute and often execute their geniuses. All Joe was trying to do was to save them from famine, save them from their own stupidity, save them from extinction, and they've decided to repay him with a public execution. Fortunately, because everyone trying to kill Joe is so stupid, he manages to survive longer than probably most people they've sent to this arena, and also grabs a microphone and says what I think many of us probably think on a regular basis these days. He says, "Do you really want to live in a world where you blow up the one person that's trying to help you?" And what happens next is maddeningly predictable. Again, we see this all the time, even now. In fact, there's probably not a single person on the right that's listening to this right now that hasn't at least for a moment had to stop and wonder if it's even worth trying to save the people that seem content to march directly to extinction, just like the crowd in this movie is hell-bent on doing. But luckily, before the legions of NPCs can put to death the one man that's trying to save them, Rita manages to hijack the control room and broadcasts a video of crops that are now growing in the fields because they've been using water instead of Brondo, which calms the crowd down. But you see, it's not until the TV screens told Planet NPC that Joe's plan to water the crops with water was working that they believed it. And again, this is just a reality that we see today. This is just how NPCs operate. They go with the crowd. They do what the automated machines tell them to do, what the mega corporations tell them to do, what the politicians tell them to do. It's not until the pretty people on TV tell them to think differently that they update their programming. So you see, the future is not going to be like Idiocracy. We're already living in it. And many of the people listening and watching this right now are just like Joe in one way or another, screaming in the faces of NPCs that you need to stop watering your crops with Brondo if you don't want to go extinct. For Blackpilled, I'm Devon Stack. If you like my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you share. If you want to support my work, you can grab a copy of my book. Link is in the description. You can send crypto to one of the addresses below or become a patron at patreon.com/blackpilled or subscribestar/blackpilled.